What got me interested in insects? Well, my parents report that I was watching ants when I was in diapers. So I don't really recall the first moments, but I was always there, and supposedly I could identify and I knew each individual ant by her name. So I would say that one's Fred and Peter and Sally and Sue, and I've completely forgotten their individual names. I can't tell them apart that well anymore, but as a kid, I apparently knew every ant. I was a graduate student. I came to Harvard to study under E.O. Wilson. I didn't really understand what Harvard was about, and it was like a lot of tension and nervous people and super egos and so forth, and I wanted to get out of there kind of super fast. So I passed my oral exams and got money to go to Asia, and I realized if I went over there and looked for all these great stories, the stories that I wanted to find of all these ants and creatures, that people might think I was sitting around smoking something with a guru somewhere, making stuff up unless I could document somehow. So I got a book on how to photograph supermodels and figured out that you needed a main light, a fill light, and a hair light. And with these three lights, you can get a kind of a studio effect that's quite beautiful. So my ants have a nice hair light, so the hairs are sweetly backlit, and it gives them a nice dimensionality, and also separates them from their background and all kinds of things. So all you have to do is build this studio into the front of your camera and carry it around with you. So I figured that out. Patience is, of course, important, and you have to be able to be in one place, no matter what it is in nature, for a long period of time. And it's kind of ironic because living in New York with all the action activity, and then you go to the jungle and you're sometimes just sitting there in utter quiet and not hearing a human voice for days as you're waiting for a flower to unfold or a snake to uncoil. But when the moment happens, you have it in reality, you have the truth. You have the truth of that moment, and people respect that. I mean, it's easily, some of these things are easily faked, and you see fakes all the time, but the true moment is a distinct thing, and the movement even of an ant has a lot of action and emotion to it, if you catch even an ant in its activity. So that difference is what makes National Geographic great, because they go after these true moments. How did I earn the nickname Indiana Jones of entomology? Well, I guess I get in a lot of battles with small critters. So one way or another, I track them down, and I actually have never really been seriously bitten by anything, surprisingly. Most small creatures respect me, I like to think, and I know how to approach them and handle them without hurting them or getting hurt in return. So one way or another, I just am kind of it's a skill I have had from my age in diapers watching ants. This capacity to deal with insects and understand their world and get down to their level and see them from their own level, where they tower over you, where they're impressive creatures. Well, I was fairly worried about the frog as well, because it's a kind of a long story. I can tell bits of it. But to get to this frog, you have to fly through a tiny port city and then rent a boat and go up a river. And it's quite elaborate, and very few people have ever done it. So we arrived at this small town, rented a boat, tried to go up river, and the water was too low, and our rental boat couldn't get up with its engine, and we were dropped off by the side of the river by someone who was probably a drug smuggler, who was very angry that we didn't pay him the whole amount to go the whole way. And we worked our way to an Indian village and got a dugout canoe through some drinking of rice wine and lots of negotiations over the next day. And we got this dugout canoe, and we had to drag it up river for 2 days because the water was so low. I had to wear shorts, and my skin, I'm a pale, pasty guy. And so I got sunburn so bad on my legs that I had these huge blisters. So by the time I got to the frogs in this remote village, I could barely walk. I had to walk like Frankenstein on stiff legs. And so we got to the frogs, and I was worried because if the frogs touched me, they can potentially kill a person. So I basically covered myself with plastic, and I enveloped my legs with plastic. And my assistant, who was a part-time male stripper from Panama, was quite a character. He was a big, meaty guy who was very strong and liked to show off. And so, because I couldn't move my legs, he would lower me to the ground and in front of the frog, which would start hopping towards me. And I would take the pictures, and he would pick me up and move me away so that the frog couldn't touch me. So I managed the frog pictures with this technique. Well, ants are serious fighters. You know, the Bible says, "Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise." And I don't know if King Solomon was referring to their fighting skills. He was probably referring more to the fact that they saved their food for periods of where they were hungry, and they were, careful about the way they organized their lives in other ways. But ants, first and foremost, for most people, are fighters, because when they see us, they are willing to be kamikazes. An ant is willing to die for the cause all the time. And there's even an ant in Borneo that will blow up. Its whole body will blow up. So it's a literal kamikaze suicide bomber ant when it touches an enemy. In Peru, I accidentally sat on the most lethal snake in the Americas, which is the fer-de-lance. And I would not recommend doing this. But if you do this, you should do it correctly. You should sit exactly as I did, straight on its head. And I apparently compressed its head down so it wasn't able to bite me back. But the whole thing, I should clarify, was an error. And I don't think the snake enjoyed it any more than I did. How do I protect myself when I'm in the field? I don't know. I never have troubles in the field. For some reason, I seem to be a natural for what I do. I'm rarely bitten by anything. I don't get sick. I've been with people who've gotten various diseases and so forth, but I never get sick. And so, in a way, for me, it's more natural than New York City. I am much more likely to get lost or make a wrong turn in New York City than I am in Borneo.